Hi, everyone. I'm Jess, and I'm the content manager here at Course Report. At Course Report, we help people navigate the world of technical skills boot camps, whether you're figuring out which skills to learn, where to apply, or how to fund your boot camp journey. Over the past few years, remote work has opened up new opportunities for software engineers, but more recently, we're really seeing that shift back to the office or RTO policies. And it really made me start thinking about more like what is in person versus remote work and what that looks like for boot camp grads these days. Does working in person give you maybe better mentorship and networking opportunities, or is remote work still the best option for flexibility and work life balance? To help answer these questions, I'm so excited to be joined by two Tech Elevator graduates who are now working as software engineers, one in an in person role and one in a remote role. So today I'm so happy to have graduates DJ Litz and Shane Smith talking with us today about software engineering remotely versus in person. DJ graduated from Tech Elevator in late 2023, now works in person as a software engineer at JP Morgan Chase. And Shane Smith graduated from Tech Elevator in early 2023, now a remote software engineer at FNBO. So DJ and Shane, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your insights. Let's jump on in. You both studied computer science in college, I noticed, before enrolling at Tech Elevator. And I'd love to know what prompted you to enroll in a coding bootcamp in 2023. So, Shane, let's start with you.
Sure. Um, Without getting the whole backstory, basically, I'd left the police department and decided that I didn't want to do that anymore. So I wanted to get back into programming and computer stuff. I had just gotten into my junior year in UC Denver in Colorado for computer science, and I was there for almost 3 years, and I didn't really learn that many skills. Everything you have to learn, for the first couple of years in college is all not related to what you're actually doing in the career field. I didn't really want to get back into that. I know a lot of people have said that a lot of college stuff, especially for fast-paced career fields like computer science, they're teaching stuff that was in vogue in the career field 20 years ago, but it's not really applicable to what most programmers do today. Um, so it didn't really seem like the best use of my time or money to go back to college and finish that degree at that time. Tech Elevator obviously had a much faster course to get a boot camp certification and get into the career field faster, and that definitely worked a lot better for my situation.
And DJ, what about you?
Yeah, so I'd say kind of a similar situation. I did some college, and I kind of discovered that I enjoyed coding in college. Due to some personal issues, I ended up dropping out of college about halfway through and entered the casino industry as just kind of a temporary career. And I went into the casino industry knowing that long term I wanted to get into coding still and have that be kind of my profession. And so when I was finally ready, I was considering my options, and I was initially planning on going back to college, and I knew that that would be probably at least a 2 year commitment. And I actually spoke to a friend who highly recommended coding boot camp, and I said, "Hey, let's try it out." I had heard of coding boot camps, but I wasn't really sure what to think. I didn't know anybody who had gone through one, but based on high recommendations, I went for it, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah, I'd love to know what set Tech Elevator apart from other coding boot camps, DJ, when you were kind of looking around.
The person who recommended me to Tech Elevator has worked at a couple other boot camps. I don't want to necessarily name drop, but he had a glowing recommendation of Tech Elevator and said, "Hey, Tech Elevator has the best numbers right now for job placement." And I mean, thankfully, I was in a place where I could afford Tech Elevator, so I decided to pull the trigger and do it.
And Shane and DJ, I'd love to know when you enrolled at Tech Elevator, were you enrolling with a preference towards working remotely or in person? Shane, let's start with you.
Mine actually worked out the opposite of what I wanted. So I was actually looking for in person to start off because I think that's much more beneficial for a new developer because it's a lot easier to stop by someone's desk and say, "Hey, man, can you help me with this?" Where remotely, especially beginning, I had to people I had no idea who they were or like what their personality was or anything. I'd have to try to get a hold of them on Microsoft Teams or something and schedule a Zoom meeting where, again, my background was a very in-person type of career field, military and police. So I don't have a lot of background as far as Zooming or doing any kind of like digital communication. So that was definitely a curveball that I would have preferred to be in office initially. But I think as you develop your skills and learn how to code and debug things, there's definitely a lot of flexibility and a lot of benefit to being remote.
Hmm. And DJ, what about you? Were you hoping to work in person or remotely when you started this career?
Honestly, I don't really remember. I know that at the time, I think kind of working remotely was kind of a glorified thing. So I'm thinking I probably wanted to work remotely. That said, I mean, right now I'm really happy that I'm working in person.
Hmm. Shane, without going into too many details in general, what did you learn at Tech Elevator in 2023?
Obviously, the coding part is important, but that's really, I would say, not the focus of what you need to learn when you're there. The bigger thing that you learn, if you haven't already, is problem solving and how to research the issue that you're looking for. A lot of people say this, and I'll just reiterate it that the real difference between a junior developer and a senior developer isn't that they won't come to the same conclusion or find the same answer. It's that the senior developer will find it in 5 minutes, and the junior developer might take them 5 hours or 5 days to find the same solution. And it's not necessarily the senior developer is smarter than the junior developer. They just know how to find the answer faster. So that really is a skill that I think Tech Elevator helped with. And I think part of it is because it's so compressed. I did the 3 month one. And because of that, and because of how vast and deep you can go into programming and every little detail and how things work, there's not time for that. So a lot of it, if you want to learn, you have to do it on your own time and do more research. So that definitely kind of pushes you more towards that mindset of finding the answers for yourself on things.
Hmm. DJ, did you find that there were any specific skills or projects from Tech Elevator that directly helped you land your current job?
Well, the skill that I think really stands out to me would be the skill of networking. I think networking is such an underrated. I mean, people say that networking is important, but I think even how much people say networking is important is not enough. Um, I have met so many people in the last several months through networking skills that I definitely did not have before I started Tech Elevator. But Tech Elevator pushing you to meet other people in your cohort and like do practice interviews and things like that really improves your social skills to the point where networking becomes a lot easier. I will say another thing that I think helped a lot was the so I also did full time, and full time does the final capstone where you're working in like a scrum group. Working in a scrum group like that and like really being a part of a team where every day we're coming and checking in and putting in goals for the day. That's a great real work simulation, but I don't think you really get that in a lot of training. So yeah, I'd say those were kind of like the big skills outside of all the technical skills, obviously. But
Yeah. So I'd love to know a little bit about where you're both working. Shane, what team do you work on now at this bank, FNBO, and like what kinds of projects are you responsible for?
Um, so my internship was different, but now I am currently with the operational data store, which I'm sure a lot of companies obviously have this. We use IBM for the back end. So we have a lot of very slow services, like most banks and most financial services. That obviously creates a bottleneck. And the more websites, the more applications, everything that you have, obviously, the more demand that is put on those systems. So what my team actually does is we built a cache system where all the information that you want to get from the IBM servers is accessible from something that is much quicker. Like we use Java with Spring Boot. So we built something that makes the bank react a lot faster as far as the applications and response times for all the customers and all of our third party vendors and everything that use our services.
Cool. And DJ, what about you? What's your team at JP Morgan and what are some of the projects you're working on?
Yeah, so JP Morgan is split into a bunch of different lines of businesses, as they're called. So I work in a line of business called employee platforms, and employee platforms, their entire role is to support other JP Morgan employees through our products. Sorry, so when I say through our products, those are like internal things that other team members are able to use. So my team operates a content management system based on Adobe Experience Manager. So essentially, we enable like user permissions and like rules about how people interact with our content management system. And then we also run a Java-based API that allows our end user to retrieve data from that content management system through our API. So CMSs or content management systems, it took me about 2 or 3 months to even understand what my team's product was because I had absolutely zero background with content management systems.
I love that. You had to adapt, and I'm sure the boot camp kind of helped you jump in with that. So I'd love to look at like what a typical day for both of you on the job looks like. So DJ, what does a typical day look like in person as a software engineer?
Yeah, so I have a daily call with my team at 9 o'clock. So usually I'm in office somewhere between 7:30 and 9:30, 10 o'clock, depending on when my first meeting is. If I have like a really early first meeting, then I'll get in, or sometimes I'll take that first meeting at home and then come into the office later. So I am still able to work remotely. It's just I try to be in office. So I'd say usually I get into the office in the morning, do my morning call, and then usually I have a couple hours of just kind of time to work on whatever I need to work on. I take a lunch and eat lunch with whomever I want to. And then sometimes we'll have like some agile ceremony things like a backlog refinement or sprint retrospective or things like that. We usually do those in the afternoon. And then I tend to devote the last hour of my day from about 4 to 5 p.m. to personal development. So right now I'm working on a certification. So I just spend about an hour a day working on that at the end of my day.
Oh,
Um,
certification.
It's an Adobe Experience Manager certification. So that's the CMS that we're working with.
That's awesome. And then Shane, what does, a day in the life of a remote engineer look like for you?
I would say the skeletal structure is the same. We obviously have a stand up in the morning and everything that's pretty obviously typical with an agile environment. But being remote is great because I don't have a commute, obviously, to get to work. So it doesn't matter if there's traffic or not. Depending on the day of the week, I usually get up early and go either work out or go to play pickleball, which I know that's the new rave. So I do play pickleball. I usually get back in time to cook breakfast and then go check on my garden or the grove, then log in, check on some emails, stuff like that. And then because my main team works out of Omaha, Nebraska, they're an hour behind. So I get even more time for my stand up until it starts because obviously they have a different time zone. So um, then once that's over, obviously hook up with whatever employees I need to coordinate for whatever project we're doing or just get to work on coding. Kind of the same thing as DJ. Grab lunch whenever I can or whenever I need to. Also, benefit of working from home, I don't have to bring a lunch or go down the street to buy anything. I can just go in my fridge. Um, and besides that, kind of the same thing. So we have every other Friday we have 2 hours dedicated to improving your skills. But obviously you also have more leeway depending on your manager and everything. So slightly different, but also working on another certification. I just finished my cloud practitioner. Now I'm working on the cloud developer because I do work on a team that puts things into production. Sometimes I do have to work late or log on later and, do a deployment at 8, 9 o'clock at night because, you want all of your customers to be as minimal as possible when you're doing something that impacts their access.
DJ, what do you feel like the benefits are for you of working in person or this sort of hybrid schedule, especially as a new software engineer? Do you feel like there's anything about being in office that has sort of helped you like push your career already?
I think being in office is excellent. I definitely prefer being in office. So right now we are on a hybrid schedule. 3 days in office is the expectation. I tend to have like 4 or 5 days in office every week. Um, the benefits, if I have a question and my teammate is sitting right around the corner from me, I can stand up and walk to their desk and just say, "Hey, you have a quick second?" And to me, that is more efficient than pinging them on Teams and hoping that they see it and that they don't just leave me on red. And like actually having that person to person interaction, I think makes communicating about your project much more efficient.
Mm.
But I also think personally, you're able to make much stronger connections when you're working in office. My team, we have lunch together probably at least once or twice a week. And I think that builds a relationship that you don't necessarily build when you're only communicating with each other over Zoom. Um, Yeah, and also networking. Networking is so important. So, and I mentioned this earlier. Networking is great. So I have two mentors here in the company, and every 2 weeks we meet for about 30 to 45 minutes. And I think my connections like that would not be as strong if we were only meeting over Zoom. But because these connections are strong, I think that if I need to use a connection like that in the future for either a job switch or like changing lines of business within the company, I think that would be way easier with those strong connections than if those connections weren't as strong.
Mm. And Shane, what are some of your favorite parts of working remotely as a software engineer right now?
Well, like we talked about, the lack of commute is pretty hard to undersell. You know, you don't have to put the maintenance on your vehicle or try to get a ride on a bus or Uber, whatever you need to. The flexibility is also nice, but again, like DJ said, if you have a hybrid role, I think that gives you a
Mm.
little bit of both. But one thing I will say that 100% is better about the remote setup, if you can, is that my setup here at the house is 100% better than what I have when I go into the office. We do have multiple monitors at the tower in Omaha, which is nice, but they're also, I think, maybe like 21-inch monitors, something like that. So I have 32-inch multiple monitors here, so being able to look at something much bigger and have multiple windows is a lot easier here at the home setup. And you can obviously customize it to what you want. Like you can get whatever desk you want, whatever chair you want. So there is some benefit to working remote, even as far as like the hardware and everything. Um, and then obviously meals, stuff like that. If I have to leave early for a vacation or something like that. I don't have to drive from the office back to my house to get my stuff ready and leave. Like I'm already here. I just log off and go grab my stuff when we leave the house or whatever. But I do want to reinforce what DJ said. I do think that there is a huge benefit to being in person. Um,
Hmm.
and again, I think as more junior developers, you definitely, if you have a choice, I would do more in person just because you do get that more interaction and more networking with people, especially when you're more junior and you have more of a learning curve to get up to.
Yeah, totally. I was going to ask, since you started as a remote developer, in what ways did you feel like your team sort of helped you scale up as a new developer? Was there more mentoring online for you, or have you just kind of had to figure it out yourself from your own home office?
Um, so as I said before, I was in an internship initially. So that I've been through 3 different teams so far with the bank. The first team was awesome. They were super helpful. Everyone was willing to kind of show me how things work with that team and how their services and their stack works. The second team was not as great, but not because of the people, because what they were doing, they didn't have enough people and they were working on something that everyone had to be working constantly. So there was no time to bring me up to speed or help me set things up. So that was frustrating, I think, for everyone. And then luckily, I spoke to my manager about it and got moved to a different team. And then I ended up staying there after the internship, which is where I'm at now in ODS. And I have a phenomenal team of mid-level and senior developers that are very helpful with things and willing to, kind of walk you through stuff or show you how things are done. Because obviously everything's always different. You can find an answer online, but I'm sure DJ knows like the answer online you might find is probably for an independent developer, and it might not be the way things work in your company, right? Because you have different IT, different infosec. So there's not a one answer that'll solve it for you and your environment necessarily.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about communication in both of these settings. DJ, how are you communicating with your team? Is it mostly in-person meetings for you now, or are you doing Microsoft Teams and Zoom meetings and Slack huddles?
We primarily do Zoom meetings. We do try to do at least one meeting in person every week or two. Um, the reason that we tend to use Zoom, so my team's managing director is actually not in Chicago.
Mm.
He's in Delaware. So in order for him to join the call, he has to join via Zoom. Um, luckily, here in the tower, we have rooms that essentially act as like Zoom conference rooms. So sometimes for our in-person meetings, he's still able to join by like conferencing in. So that's pretty cool. Um, Other than that, it's a lot of Teams. Like if I just have like a quick question that I need to ask someone, I'll usually just send them a Teams message, or in person.
Mm.
But yeah, I'd say primarily our meetings are over Zoom.
And Shane, what about you? I'm guessing a lot of Slack, Zoom, but are there ever on-site meetings that you go to during the year?
There are. We actually don't use Slack. I know that's like the stereotypical developer communication, but we actually don't use Slack. We only use Microsoft Teams.
Mm.
I think DJ said the same thing. I think it's obviously mostly big Fortune 500 or other companies like that. They use more of the traditional like Microsoft and stuff like that more than they use the upstart like Slack and stuff like that. But um, our policy for the bank has actually just changed starting this year, where they want us, even remote employees, to come into the office at least 4 times a year. So once a quarter. But they obviously pay for the flight and your food and all that while you're there. So I'll take a vacation to Omaha for a week, a couple times a year. But yeah, most of it for day to day is usually either a Teams messages, or we use Zoom for most of our meetings because we have people all over the country.
Mm. And DJ, when you're thinking about the future of software engineering jobs, like, are you seeing it going towards more remote or hybrid or in-person work?
Um, so purely from my vantage point, I mean, JP Morgan made a big deal about this year. JP Morgan as a company is going back to full in person. So there are a few exceptions to that, but for the most part, JP Morgan is moving to full in person. Pretty much up until actually today was the first day. Before today, we were like hybrid company wide. Um, but I think that right now, like big companies are moving towards in person. I think startups are still kind of doing whatever they see as best.
Mm.
It's hard to say that there's like a trend because it is changing so much. That's kind of what I'm seeing.
Yeah. And Shane, what about you? You mentioned that FNBO is having more on-site once a quarter for remote employees. Are you seeing it maybe changing over more to hybrid or in person? Or do you think remote work will still be around?
For the bank, remote work will still be around. They do encourage people that are local to Omaha to be more on a hybrid schedule and come in a couple times a week. Like we talked about, I think there's definitely a benefit to that. But there is obviously a benefit to remote work too. So, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. I think the hybrid is probably the best schedule for everyone, the employees and the employer, but I might be a little biased. When I moved from Tampa at the end of last year, I used to go to a Tampa developer meetup called Tampa Devs, and also a Java user group meetup. And every time we go there, usually who would host us for the meeting is a recruiting department for IT or something, right? So they'd always post, these are the new job openings, these are what the numbers and the salaries are looking like. And anyone who's getting into computer programming for incredible salaries where you're going to make, $500,000 a year or something insane, or you're going to work remote from the Bahamas, like that's just not a thing anymore. Like DJ said, it's not just JP Morgan. most companies, even smaller startups, are going back to at least a hybrid, if not fully back to the office. And the trend has been that the salaries are coming back down to more realistic than they were during the pandemic, because obviously Netflix and all these big companies saw a huge jump in their people watching their media. So they threw a bunch of money at the developers to build stuff faster. Well, that's not happening anymore. So just for anyone who's getting into this career field, don't expect to come in, making 100,000 your first year or something like that. That's definitely not the way that companies are paying developers anymore.
Mm. For future bootcamp grads who are watching this video, do you think applying for remote jobs versus in-person jobs requires a different approach? DJ, let's start with you.
I think I'd say it's like pretty similar. I'd say I don't think there's going to be a ton of differences. I will say if you are doing a remote job, they might ask you more questions about like how are you at like starting yourself and getting things done without like external motivation, because that is an important thing to have when you're, or I would imagine that's an important thing to have when you're working remotely. But other than that, I don't really see anything that would be too different between the two.
Shane, I saw you shaking your head in agreement. What's your thoughts on this?
Oh, 100%. The self-starting thing is a big one. I have a really great manager. He is very much about, you get the job done that you need to get done. I don't need you to be here from 9 to 5 every day. You get the work that you need to get done. So I have a lot of flexibility. I can work really hard, 3 days, and then, maybe be around, do some studying, or, do certification stuff for like a day or something. But there is definitely something to be said about what DJ mentioned, which is there's no one here watching over me, right? I don't have a manager over my chair. So we don't have any of the babysitting software, and I'm very thankful for that. But it does put a lot back on the individual programmer, that like you need to have the motivation to get your work done, obviously. So I would say when you're applying, if you're applying for remote, it definitely would help more to see more projects that you've done yourself, and show that you have the motivation just to develop, that you don't need someone kind of directing you. Where in person, I would say that it would be still good to have, but not 100% necessary, because like DJ said, like there's someone there who can help you along, or like give you, hey man, I see you sitting on your phone for the last half hour, like you need something to do, I'll give you some work.
I mean, one thing I just want to say, like, even though I do work in person, I don't feel any pressure at all to like,
Mm.
oh, you're not working enough. Like, I think just like being in person, like, gives that pressure on its own. Like, I listen to podcasts like pretty regularly while I'm working. Like, it's still a very relaxed environment, even though it is in person.
Yeah, yeah. There's still like fluidity. You're not like held
Exactly.
to task every moment of
It's
the day.
yeah. If I want to leave 2 hours early, like, okay, yeah, whatever, no problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Um,
another thing I would say about what DJ just mentioned, is obviously when you're applying to, if you're not, whenever, we all know when you're first applying for a job, you just want a job anywhere, right? If
Yeah.
you get in the door as a developer, that means that you'll probably get another job as a developer, but that first job is very hard to get. And most people, and I would suggest this too, as long as it's a legit job and not a scam, take the first developing job you get, almost no matter what, because you just need your foot in the door to show that you can do the job, and then other companies will be interested in you. But once you're past that, another huge thing that I think DJ kind of touched on was your work environment and your culture. Like, because the bank's culture that I work at, I've been very lucky. Like I said, we don't micromanage. There is no, how many hours were you logged in today? It's based on how much work you get done. And it sounds like DJ has a similar kind of environment where it's not, everyone's over your shoulder all the time. But I know a lot of people that do not work in that environment in coding. So I don't want to set a false expectation that, everyone's laid back and like just get your job done. Cause I know more than a few developers that work in a very stressful environment where everyone is constantly checking on what you're doing and how far you've gotten. So a big thing to look for when you're getting past that first job is look at the work culture and talk to people that work there and see, how they treat their employees.
yeah, I feel like that goes back into DJ talking about networking and just, yeah, building that network, building those ties. I would love to know, at this point in both of your careers, was going to Tech Elevator worth it for you? DJ, I'll start with you.
Absolutely. I tell people all the time that Tech Elevator did a great job of setting me up for success in my interviews. And I mean, for just like the technical education and teaching me how to network, I think all of those are absolutely worth it. And obviously, it is kind of a brutal career, like a career market right now. But like if you have the drive and the motivation to like make it happen, I think it is absolutely a good investment.
And Shane, what about you? Is it worth it for you?
Definitely. I think what DJ said is a perfect point, that I think Tech Elevator should pay me because I have sent them so many people. I've had friends, I've had random people when I go to the developer meetups that ask me, like what I suggest. I looked into a bunch of boot camps, kind of the same thing as DJ. I had a friend who was a data science engineer, and he knew someone who used to work at Tech Elevator. So I talked to her, and she was 100% an advocate that Tech Elevator was one of the better boot camps to go to. And part of that is, like DJ mentioned, was you not only get the technical skills, but they actually have people there that will help you. They have mock in-person interviews or mock Zoom interviews. So it's not just can you code, it's developing those soft skills, like how do you talk to people, how do you interact with people. And Tech Elevator does a great job of doing that. And we have an alumni group. So even once you're done with Tech Elevator, you can still contact people that you went to boot camp with or that came after you. You can still go to classes. Margaret Green, she's phenomenal, and she still teaches classes you can go to, even though, DJ and I have been out for 2 years from the boot camp. You could still go check out a React class. And if you want to brush up on it, you don't need to pay more or do anything. You still have access to that years after you're done with the boot camp as an alumni.
That's so cool. That's invaluable, especially, yeah, as you're mentioning, just continuing to grow and learn as a software engineer is such an important aspect of the career, and that Tech Elevator is there for you through that whole process. Well, I feel like that's such a perfect place to wrap up this Q&A. Thanks so much for talking with us today, Shane and DJ. And thanks so much to all of you who are watching. We're going to be posting a transcript of this video interview on the Course Report blog with contact information for Tech Elevator, just in case you're inspired to apply for any of their upcoming cohorts. And in the meantime, you can follow Course Report on Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. And if you're a bootcamp alum, don't forget to post a review of your bootcamp experience on Course Report. Your review is a huge help to anyone who's thinking of getting into tech today.